My family was in the textile business. In fact, we were woolen manufacturers. My father had a small mill up in Bradford in Yorkshire, which was the centre of the woolen industry, where we had about 200 workers weaving cloth. And as the only son, I was supposed to go into my father's business. But I had just been in the American Army in 1945-46, just at the end of the war, and I had a very adventurous and rather traumatic time seeing the aftermath of the Holocaust and displaced persons and all sorts of images that one likes to forget but can't, including all the bombed cities and denazification of the Germans. It was a very traumatic time. Yet here was expected to go to the Bradford Technical College to learn textiles and sit behind a desk again, having to draw on graph paper, little dots to make textile designs, a huge contrast and very difficult to take. After the college, I went to work in my father's factory as a worker. I wore a border suit, I got greasy, I was there early in the morning, I mixed with the workers. We had a great time. They were all very kind to me and didn't treat me like the boss's son. I was just one of the workers. And after learning as much as I could, I then went back to London to become a salesman, trying to sell materials and cloth for my father, who had a company called Regent Woolen Fabrics in Mortimer Street, just near Oxford Circus. But I was distracted. I had just got into magic. I started visiting magic clubs practically every night of the week. In fact, not practically, but Monday nights I went to the Magic Circle. Tuesday, the Zodiac Society in Ealing. Wednesday was the Unique Magicians Club in Soho. Thursday, the Institute of Magicians at Vauxhall Bridge Road. And Friday, the London Society of Magicians in Holborn. On Saturday, I would usually go to a variety theatre in the hope of seeing a magician. That's how I was distracted from textiles. And the other thing was the Polytechnic in Regent Street. There were people of my own age, so I befriended lots of them, although I wasn't actually attending the Polytechnic, only as a part-time student. So I joined all the different clubs they had: archery club, the fencing club, the judo club, the bridge club, and so on. I kept myself very occupied and made a lot of friends. And as I was a good gymnast, I was in the gym team, but when the instructor was away, I was asked to take over. So I became the PTI, that's the physical training instructor, at the Polytechnic extension in Titchfield Street, where they had the gym. So I can say that I worked professionally as a physical training instructor. I played in bands, I played various instruments, and I enjoyed playing in jazz bands. But I had many other interests, and one of them was psychology. On the medical side, particularly suggestion and hypnosis has always fascinated me. So I started attending lectures at King's College, the Tavistock Clinic in Belsize Park, and the Polytechnic. I was never a full-time student, and then I tried out my hypnotic skills at private parties, never thinking it would ever become a profession. It was one of those things. And how did that happen? Well, London was quite a depressing place at the time. We still had rationing from the war, although it was 3 years later. The weather was always bad. We had thick fogs, what they call pea soupers. We had a shortage of fruit. And then some relations came over from South Africa and painted this fantastic picture of lovely beaches, beautiful flowers, plentiful food, especially fruit, and they even offered me a job if I wanted to come over. Very tempting idea. Well, I spent a few days in a cold seaside resort, Eastbourne, walking up and down the beach thinking, should I make this big step? I remember wearing a trench coat, it was raining. It was a difficult decision, but I thought, yes, I would. I came back to London and I took all my money, £90, and bought myself a ticket in the cheapest cabin on a ship called the Athlone Castle of the Union Castle Line. I didn't realize what I had done until I got on the ship. The cabin was deep in the hold of the ship. It was rocking and rolling because they had no stabilizers in those days and no air conditioning. You could smell the oil from the engines. It wasn't a very pleasant place to be, no porthole, but that's what I could afford. Well, I made myself known to some of the passengers, and I had a few pocket tricks, magic tricks in my pocket, and showed them a few things, and made a few friends on the ship. And then a strange thing happened, which changed my life. The trip from Southampton to Cape Town took 2 long weeks, 14 days, and halfway through we were crossing the equator when it's very hot and humid and people in a bad mood. And remember, in those days they didn't have an entertainment crew and they didn't have any kind of entertainment. The passengers had to make their own entertainment, but one of the highlights was to see a cinema show on a primitive projector, and just that night, when we were crossing the equator, the projector broke down. There was pandemonium because people, as I said, were hot and humid, and they had to entertain in some way. So the officers got together and said, perhaps we can put on a passenger show, see what talent we've got. And somebody said, well, this young man, pointed to me, is a magician. He's been doing some tricks at the bar. Would you do some magic? And I said, well, not really, because what I was carrying in my pockets were little things like color-changing pen knives and a pack of cards, of course, and some flash paper that bursts into fire, all sorts of small things, but nothing that would be suitable for a big crowd of about 500 passengers. And they also found a lady, rather a big lady, who said she could sing. So they booked her, and once again they asked me, isn't there something you could do? I said, well, I could give you a talk on memory systems. Yes, that would be interesting. They said without much enthusiasm. And then I said, or I could give you a talk on hypnosis. What? That would be fantastic, they said, expecting it to be about 10, 15 minutes. Well, on the night, all the passengers had got together in the big hall. Then the lady sang, and people were wincing quite a bit and waiting for her to finish. But it wasn't over until the big lady sang, because I had to come on and follow that. And I started giving a talk on hypnosis. Now, I had learned a lot about it, and I'd experienced it in my classrooms and demonstrated it at parties, but never to a big crowd like this. And I started doing a demonstration. One of the things is there were some British soldiers traveling back to South Africa, and I got them up as volunteers. Remember, it was very humid, and I made them, under hypnosis, I made them feel very cold, freezing cold. They put their greatcoats on, they were still shivering. I got people up to touch their hand, and they felt they were cold, and their faces were cold. It was quite a dramatic demonstration. And the demonstration took well over an hour, and people were absolutely fascinated, and I really got into my stride. Well, when the demonstration was over, instead of people dispersing, I had people all around me wanting to ask questions. All of a sudden, a ship of what seemed to be healthy people all had some complaint. Somebody wanted to stop smoking, somebody had a stutter, somebody had a skin complaint. There were various other complex things, and asked me if I could help. And I sort of tried to stave them off. And then some were quite insistent. So some passengers said to me, why don't you treat some people? I'm sure they would pay you something. They talked to the person who said, yes, he can use a particular cabin, which we've got available, on the same level as the purser's office. And that was a beautiful cabin with 2 portholes and 2 beds. And they put me in there. And once I started using that as my consulting room, we had a queue of people. And the purser very kindly said, now you can use it as your cabin. What a terrific upgrade from the little cabin I had in the hold of the ship. And it was very successful, but I would not treat anyone before they had seen either the ship's doctor or one of the passenger doctors that we had on board to make sure that it was safe. Well, after a couple of days of having really big success in running this so-called clinic. Some ladies came to me, 3 or 4 ladies, bringing a very old lady, which we'd all noticed. She was bent over double, she was wearing a shabby black dress, her hair was tousled, she looked 90. She walked with one crutch and one stick, hobbling around the ship. Everybody noticed her. I think most people were too embarrassed to even talk to her. And they said, "Can you help this lady? She's very depressed." I said, "No, I'm sorry, that's not in my field, that's not the sort of thing we can do." And they were very insistent. They said, "Well, maybe you can help in some way, just to cheer up a little bit." I said, "Well, I'll try again." I made sure that she got the permission from the ship's doctor, who said it was quite safe to go ahead. Well, I hypnotized this lady with the other ladies sitting there as chaperones. Under hypnosis, I told her to breathe deeply and then slowly sit up, and from being in stoop position, suddenly she rose and she looked 20 years younger, and her face relaxed. She had a little smile on her face. It's quite dramatic. Now, if I had woken her at that moment, it could be quite damaging, because if somebody's used to being doubled over and walking with a stoop, then you can't just say, "Okay, you're sitting up right now." She'll have a shock and probably be worse off. So I had to put her back into that position that she was in, woke her up and said, "How do you feel?" And she said, "Great." I said, "Do you remember sitting up just now?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Well, you can do this by yourself, and I'm sure you can help yourself if you just go for little walks around the ship." Well, she was very weepy, and so were the ladies watching. It was very dramatic, and I made the biggest sacrifice that I could, because I got up early. I normally don't do that. Went around the ship with her holding on to me, still using the stick, and instead of the crutch she held onto my arm. And every morning, before the passengers got out, we were walking around the deck, because she was very self-conscious and didn't want to do this in front of the passengers. And the background story was very simple. When she was young, she had a boyfriend who was very athletic, wanted to take her for walks, and she felt very stiff and unwell and refused to go for any more walks, so much so that she stayed in bed. And when she got out of bed, she was all creaky and felt doubled over. And then she talked herself into the fact that she actually had a bad back, which she didn't have. Well, after a few days, she was walking really quite well. So I took it on myself, and I was a cheeky young man, I was 23 at the time. I took her crutch, I broke it over the rails and threw it in the sea. I said, "You'll never need that again." I don't think I would have done that later on in my life, but at that time, that's how I felt. And sure enough, she managed to walk around just holding onto one stick, still a little bit wobbly and unsure of herself. Then came the big test, because I wanted her to do that in front of the passengers. Now it so happened that the lift from the lower decks came straight up into the dining room, and I told her to wait until everyone was at lunch, and then to get into the lift and come up in the lift in the dining room in front of everybody, just walk to her table. But before we did that, I had befriended a young lady on the ship who very kindly lent her one of her calico dresses. The other ladies paid for her to go to the hairdresser and get her hair done. They put some makeup on her, some lipstick she hadn't worn for years. You would not recognize this woman. And then came the moment that she came up in the lift. The lift doors opened. There was a hubbub of conversation in the dining room, and as she came out, one or two people realized who she was, and the conversation stopped. And she started walking slowly, and then she started wobbling and holding on to something, and she looked at me at my table, and I just shook my head saying, "You can do it." I didn't say it, but she saw my face encouraging her, and she continued walking to her table. She sat down, and everybody started applauding and standing up. It was the most dramatic moment, absolutely unforgettable. But after that, she improved rapidly, and on the last night, before we arrived in Cape Town, I actually danced with her, and people were watching us. It was wonderful, and she only used the sticks lightly to keep her balance. Now, the doctor had told her in England that she only had a few months to live, and that she was going out to South Africa to join her sister to live out her last few months. And I can tell you that this lady kept writing me Christmas cards and birthday cards for at least 10 years after that event. So she really benefited from that moment. So there's a story of how, with a bit of suggestion and under hypnosis, you can make somebody feel better that way. And that story changed my life. The captain thought this was worthwhile telling the newspapers, so he telegraphed the press in Cape Town, who were waiting for me in the quayside when I arrived, to interview me about this so-called miracle cure. But I really wanted to play it down, so I said, no, magic is my hobby, and that's what they featured on.